We're very fortunate today to have Professor Judith Sihombing giving our seminar. Judith Sihombing teaches in the Faculty of Law at the Chinese University of Hong Kong and at the University of Hong Kong. So there are many things I could tell you about Judith, her achievements as a practitioner, the books she's written, practice books, texts, academic articles, the seminars she's given, the conferences she's organised and taken part in as well. So I'm sure we'll learn lots today as well. So please can you join me in welcoming Judith in this presentation of the seminar.
Now this title is Currency of Trade. We're not getting to the currency for maybe halfway through the slides. What's more important is who was there to buy things. What are we talking about? And we're talking about Southeast Asia in particular. So sellers and buyers, who are they? Who were they? The Southeast Asian, that's the map. You've got the map here if you want to have a look. Beautiful map, batik map, quite old, beautiful map. And kingdoms, you'd be surprised at the kingdoms in Sumatra, Java, and these areas. 5th century, believe it or not. I didn't until I knew about it. The products, what are they? Now, the most valuable product from Southeast Asia must be anybody? What is it? Spices. Nobody could exist without spices. No supermarkets, no refrigerators, no fresh food, etc., etc., etc. So everybody wanted spices. What was the main product from China? Nola, think. Porcelain. Imagine, blue and white eventually. Blue and white. Your broken piece of blue and white was cash money later. Think of it. And one peppercorn, this big, gave you a profit in Europe of 60,000% profit. Wow. Why weren't they flooding for centuries? Europe didn't find it till the end of the 14th century. Didn't know where it was. And we'll see how they got lost on the way there. Then the form of payment, mostly barter, exchange. And then currency. You'll be surprised. Paper money in China. 12th century. But what happened to it? They overissued. Wasn't worth wrapping your French fries in or your McDonald's hamburger in. Not worth anything. And eventually down south, we got coins. But the coins from Malaysia, the tin hat coins, they're magic coins because it's very in Southeast Asia, Malaysia, you can see Sumatra, Java in particular, were animists originally. And particularly in Java and in Malaysia, because Java people went across to Malaysia, it's the magic. The word is pawang. It means medicine man, all of these things. So the kramat, the soul of Java, was in the money. You had to be careful with it. And we'll look later at the thing that revolutionized trade throughout the world, the Spanish dollar. We had it here in Hong Kong till 1935. So if you're digging up old gardens, you might find a few buried. So get out in the fresh air. And then the foreigners. China was part of Asia, so that was okay, weren't foreigners. The foreigners were surprisingly the Portuguese, the Spaniards. The British were a bit late. They had a few disasters. One chap was coming to the Spice Islands from London. Now, my geography's pretty bad, but I know you don't go through the Arctic Circle. That's the route he took. And, of course, the ships are still frozen there. Another chap was told, well, go down past Africa and go that way. And he got to St. Helena. Who died in St. Helena? Who was killed in St. Helena? Napoleon by the British. So he gets to St. Helena 200 years before Napoleon. He said, I know what I'll do. I've got a ship full of gold. I'll make myself king. And eventually he was discouraged from that and he went home. So the Brits took a long time to get to the Spice Islands. The Dutch got there before them, but the Dutch were not very nice people. Sorry if you're Dutch, but it's true. I'm Indonesian. It's true, the Dutch are not nice. They were in Asia, they were the nastiest colonizers because they had the best torches. Yeah, I'm not telling you about them. And then we had the day we waited for, the silver revolution. Everybody in the world used Spanish silver dollars. Silver came from Patagonia, which is go south, go a bit lower west round there, and then from the Mexican mines, but very dangerous. They used mercury to clean it. We know what happens with mercury. We don't eat fish with mercury, do we? We glow at night sometimes if we eat mercury fish. All right, that's what we're going to look at. So who was in Southeast Asia? Now, Indonesia, Malaysia, Buddhist, Hindus, coming across from India, coming down from Thailand. And the kingdoms it was Mahayana Buddhism, so it's the greater vehicle, from at least the 5th century. Can you imagine that? Now, Australia at that time, the indigenous were nomadic. They'd been there for 60,000 years, but they were nomadic. Nobody ever went to Papua New Guinea in those days. Headhunters, cannibals, all of those delightful things. So nobody bothered going there. The Dutch a bit later, but they sailed quickly back to Indonesia and avoided things like that. 5th century, first kingdom in Sumatra with Hindu Buddhist. And they were always Hindu Buddhist in most cases, not Hindu or Buddhist, mostly joined in. 6th to 7th century, Kalinga, Central Java. Now, Central Java is where the Kramat, the soul of Indonesia, still exists, even though it's a Muslim state, even though there is a sultan of Central Java. It's still very mystical. I know, I lived there, and you know it's all around you. And we still have all of these magician-type people around. Good stuff. And Ramayana was the thing that was celebrated, the dancing, the statues, etc. 7th until the 13th century was a Buddhist kingdom, Srivijaya. Now, they were sailors as well, so they went all throughout the region trading. Javanese, but they took control over Sumatra, which had about 6 or 8 or 10 different races, languages, etc. West Java and the Malay Peninsula. So they went up north a little bit and took some control. And they controlled the spice routes, Srivijaya. And from China, well-known Buddhist, who I was always taught was called I Ching, but I see the name Yi Jin, I don't know, you probably got other names, went to Central Java for at least 30 years as the center of Buddhism in those days. Then China goes into Brunei. Anybody been to Brunei? Do you know Borneo? Headhunters are Borneo, you must know it. So Brunei's up here. Here is Sabah, part of Malaysia, Sarawak, part of Malaysia, and then Kalimantan, which is Indonesian, Borneo. Brilliant forests, which they're slashing and burning to grow oil palm because it's a quick sale, destroying the atmosphere, as we know. So China was in Brunei because it protected ships coming down from China in the cyclone, or our typhoon. Cyclones from the south, typhoon from here. They traded, and they were middlemen because they were requiring certain locals, if they wanted to trade with the Chinese merchants, they had to pay tribute to the emperor. Send up something nice to the emperor, make him like you, and he'll let you trade with everyone. 8th century, we're still years and centuries ago. Sailendra, Buddhist, Mahayana Buddhist. And they built the most amazing thing that is still going strong. Has anybody ever seen Borobudur? You must go and see it. Have you seen Angkor Wat? Flat as a pancake. Borobudur goes up into the heavens, in the jungle. You can get an elephant ride to go to it. The steps, I've got a metal leg, so years ago I did step up. They're about this big, like outside of Bangkok, Ayutthaya, with those stupa, those enormous steps. People in Java were not 10, 12 feet tall, and they weren't very robust. And these tiny chaps, I don't know how they did it, a few elephants maybe, a lot of slave labour, of course, in those days. So go and see Borobudur. You must see it. It's an amazing place. Oh, I think it is. Mataram, another kingdom. Hindu from 8th to the 10th, Central Java, and they then moved across to East Java. Now come the baddies. This is Majapahit, brilliant. It was there for 2 centuries, but they were very nasty chaps. And the most famous of them all, Gajah, an elephant sign. He was really naughty, and he was slashing and burning around the place. And he went into southern Malay Peninsula, Borneo, Sumatra, Bali, all under his control. You had to pay to be able to live in your own country. Now, Islam was introduced 7th century, and the traders coming across from Europe were originally Venetians. Venice, like Hong Kong, has no industry. They did build ships if you paid them enough money, and they were money people, lending and selling and borrowing high interest rates to kings who wanted to go off to war. They'd come and borrow from Venetians and have to pay it back. And Venice made money from people dying in the war so they could get a profit. Nice people. And they wanted spices, good business, didn't have to kill anyone. So they'd go to Constantinople, which is the Eastern Roman Empire, begun in the 4th century, now called. Anybody ever been to Constantinople? Istanbul, of course. So they'd join up there with merchants from Istanbul. Then they'd come in through to India and to the Spice Islands, looking for spice to sell back in Europe. But nobody else. The Venetians didn't always get to the Spice Islands, but no European ever set foot in the Spice Islands, Banda, the Moluccas, Ambon, at the little tiny ones down there. And religion was slowly going into Southeast Asia with the merchants. And the tip of Sumatra, right at the top, Aceh, that was the first area to become Islamic. The rest took another maybe 2 centuries. But amazing thing about Islamic law in that area is all of the locals had their own customs. Bit like New Territories customary law. They had custom. So when Islam came in, it didn't destroy the custom. The custom modified Islam. So it was never in the past, what's the word we use now, fundamental. Never, never, never. It was quite soft and gentle. But they were starting to change from Hinduism, Buddhism into Islam. Took couple of centuries. Now, Minangkabau, Matrilineal Society. There's one in North China, is there not? Okay. There's one in India, a couple of in Africa, and one in Malaysia and one in Indonesia, still going strong. Nice people, the Minang, the Matrilineal Society. When you want to divorce your husband, ladies, you just send him home to his mum with nothing. He's got to give you everything, but send him home. You never have to see him again. Great system. All right. Now, Thailand was also interfering in the Malay Peninsula, and they were getting bugamas, gold and flowers made from gold, pure gold. Now, bunga mas continued for East Coast in Kelantan and Perlis at the top of Malaysia, right up until the beginning of the 20th century. They were still paying their bunga mas up to the King of Siam of Thailand. So we've got people on the move. We're getting close to the 14th century. and we've got lots of different people coming in, but the main product we all want is spice. Can you give us the name of a spice? Spice. Nutmeg, clove. That's it, is it? You don't know. The most important one was pepper. Nada, pepper. Most important. We'll see what happened. So Majapahit, I told you they were bad chaps. They destroyed Palembang Kingdom, 1,000-year-old kingdom. They took over North Sumatra. They destroyed Temasek, the old Singapore. Now, Singapore was founded in 1890 by Raffles, and Singapore had stolen, the British had stolen rubber plants from Brazil. And later on we're going to see the English stole cloves, nutmegs, etc., trees, and sent them off to Sri Lanka. You don't have to destroy the country, take the product. And you're right. Naughty chaps. Not very nice people in these days, really. You wouldn't bring them home to meet your family or bring them to lunch. Now, Malacca is the most exciting place. West coast of Malaysia, a Hindu area coming across from India until 1400. And then in 1400, there was a Muslim sultan. Sultans are Muslim kings. So there was a sultan in Malacca. Who took control of Malacca in 1400? China. China took it until 1511. Now, Malacca is important. Do you know the Straits of Malacca? So you're in charge of shipping in all of these areas, and from the south coming up, you're a warehouse. You can control what's going on in the community. A very important place for China in Malacca until 1511. Not bad work. Now, it was the jewel in the crown it's been described of because of its place. Trading point, a port, originally Hindu and Buddhist, now Muslim. Majapahit still playing around a little bit, naughty old people from Majapahit, but the supply link, the entrepot port for spices was Malacca. Has anybody ever been to Malacca? Brilliant. You can see all of the influences, Chinese, Portuguese, Dutch, British, and a tiny little bit of French. Still there. You can see through the buildings and the names and things. And it was founded in 1395. Under control of Chinese merchants, and they were paying tribute up to the emperor in China. Then the Philippines. Not a great deal happening in the Philippines. They didn't seem to have had as many early kingdoms as anybody else. Sulu, sometimes part of Java, sometimes, not always. Mindanao, sometimes, not always. But they had certain personalities that were similar to the Malay person of Sumatra, Java, and the islands of Indonesia. And the Spanish came in 1521, and we'll see what happened then. Now, Brunei is the most interesting. The family, the royal family in Brunei was called Bolkiah way back then, and it's the same family now in Brunei. The richest man in the world, the Sultan of Brunei. Ever been to Bandar Sri Begawan? You must go. Capital of Brunei. Really nice place. I went for their independence, 1983. And there's this amazing museum. And you think, oh, great, you see lots of good stuff because the museum in Sarawak in the south is brilliant. It's a museum to Winston Churchill. His lunchbox, his books from school, his uniforms, his photographs, his pipes, his cigars he didn't quite finish smoking, his paintings. The former Sultan thought he was the best boy in the entire universe. They had a big patch for Winston Churchill. So go and have a look at it. It's quite interesting in the middle of nowhere. Now, they've had ties since 7th century with China. Great pals, no problems at all. And one of the Chinese princesses married one of the sultans in Brunei. And those links continued. The Portuguese tried to spread a little bit of gossip and slander about and what have you, but the Brunei people were strong against the foreigners, and they kept up with the Chinese connection. We're getting there. We're getting to the money. So what were the products apart from spices, medicinal plants? The interest in Brunei was safe harbour for Chinese junks. Ports were used from 6th century. How many years ago was that? Come on, you got fingers, you start counting. Don't bring out your machines. I asked somebody the other day in class at Hong Kong U, 1914 minus 1066. He brought out his machine and was still going 10 minutes later trying. Did you say add it in or take it away? So give up, yeah. A long time ago. All right. So they've been used since the 6th century. Would you have been on a little ship going down from China through the South China Sea in the 6th century? Would you be happy? Depends on the time of year, doesn't it? The winds, the seas. And remember, in those days, a lot of maps said the earth was flat, and if you go too far, you'll fall off the edge. What do you fall into? I never know what was there. And the map would say, here be dragons. Don't come here. Go somewhere else. So very brave sailors in the 6th century. The fleets from China who came down 5th century onwards, a lot of times each year, were large. One fleet had 60 ships. It's a lot of ships in those days. But 27,000 sailors. Now, I'm not going to ask you how many sailors on each ship. That's going to take till tomorrow to work that one out. But think about it. People in all directions. And what do you need when you get to Brunei or to Borneo or to Sumatra? Food. Lunchtime. You need food. So you need to have enough, the place you're going to have enough food. And the other thing you've got to take on board your ship is water. So enough food and water where you're going. 27,000 men. Probably the island didn't have even a quarter of those. Now Malacca, brilliant, always brilliant. Still there, still brilliant. China had different dynasties. Now I often ask my student which dynasty and I get, oh, I don't know. But there is a good little book I bought at Christmas time on the dynasties of China. Very easy to read, and you can go right through. So we're interested in these. Sung dynasty, not very, and I'm not going to ask you how many years, 25 to 279. And then Mongol Yuan dynasty, and then Ming Dynasty, and after that comes, for us in new territories, most important is Qing Dynasty. So they're the main ones. Now the Ming, they got a little bit itchy at some stage about too much trade downtown in the Southeast Asia. Porcelain shouldn't go. So some emperors didn't like foreigners. More tribute if you want to trade. Some used blue and white as the bargaining tool. Trade with Japan until 14th century between China and Japan, and China would bring the Japanese products down with them. Not many Japanese ships came down this way. And then 14th century, China increased its trade with Central Asia on the old Genghis Khan route. Remember Genghis Khan? No? Never heard of him. Okay, he'll be happy to know that. All right. And then they sent 14th century, after having 6 or 7 centuries of contact, the Ming Dynasty sent ships down to explore, to find out what was going on. Who were they? What were they doing? Was there an advantage? And he wanted to control overseas trade, that is, merchants from China going down, and to reduce foreign influence. We hear that throughout dynasties. It's up and down like a yo-yo. We like them, we don't like them. We do want them, we don't want them. And one admiral, Admiral Ching Ho, very famous, he went in 1413 on a naval expedition to Southeast Asia to see what the waters were, what the reefs were. Was it dangerous here? Pretty brave to go where you don't know where you're going, don't you think? No? All right. Okay, now here we got the outsiders. We don't like them. Gujarati from India. They were big contact with the spice market. The Arab merchants coming from Constantinople coming down also. And then the Europeans started. Now they had awful problems. 1488, Portugal sailed around Africa into the Indian Ocean. When was Suez built? Suez Canal? Oh yeah, who built it? Ferdinand de Lesseps, remember? No? All right, that's okay. Nobody knows the poor man. He dug it himself, miles and miles. Nobody knows. Anyway, you had to go around Africa. Or, as the English thought, go through the Arctic. That's the way to get to the... Spain and Portugal, under direction of the Pope, divided the world between Spain and Portugal. Nobody else existed except Spain and Portugal and our colonies. So Portugal got the east, Asia and the west part of South America. Spain got the west, the Americas. Who was the man who sailed the sea in 1492? Christopher Columbus, wasn't it? Ever heard of him? He was looking for the Spice Islands. He didn't go to the Arctic, but he didn't get the Spice Islands. Would have had to walk for centuries across America. Strange lot of people. Now, English fleet, 1553. I'm going to go through the Arctic. I'm going to get to Southeast Asia. I'm going to get the spices. 3 ships. 2 ships stuck in the ice. And they all froze to death, writing their wills. And the bodies were there years later to be found. The leader of it shows you be the leader, never be the follower. His ship's okay. It wrecks a bit, so he goes to Moscow, has a great time, and then eventually gets back to England. Now, he was the stepson of one of the investors who was merchants going off. Remember your joint stock companies in the good company law? Anybody done any company law? No. And some of you are practitioners. My gosh. So these are sort of old joint stock companies which were one venture transactions. We'll sail to get the spices and we'll come back and sell them. Now, his stepfather was the head investor, and he said, oh, I know this chap is wonderful. He was an idiot. He's never been to sea. He couldn't sail. He was only about 18. He didn't know Arthur from Martha, and off he goes up to the Arctic. And that was the end of the expedition. So 3 ships have gone for Southeast Asia. They're not there. Everybody else, Portugal's there, Spain's there, China's there, but not old England. And the Dutch are not there yet. They're thinking about it. We've got to improve our torture plan before we can go overseas. So, 1511, Portugal takes over Malacca, throws them out. We're in charge. They'd been to the Philippines, but weren't much interested in the Philippines. So they go off to Malacca. It's on the route, spices and every other naval route we need. Portugal discovered the Spice Islands, the Moluccas, Banda, Ambon, the little ones here. You'll see them there. Little sweet things. And they say that if you sailed near these islands, you knew you were near them because the perfume of the spices came miles out to sea. It's like Krakatau. You knew you were near Krakatau because the sea was changing, the colours of the sea, the colours of the sky. You know Krakatau? What year did it erupt? Not Anak Krakatau, the recent one, but Krakatau. Okay. So, problem for China when the Portuguese were taking over was they had control over the Spice Islands. Price goes up. We're in charge. We won't sell to you. So now we're in a bit of trouble. The Spanish then sailed into Southeast Asia. They were told No, your area's over there, Atlantic and the Americas. Not here, Pacific, not the Indian Ocean. But no, the Spaniards came in. And they, in 1565, did something that lasted until 1815. The most interesting part of all of this, the Manila Galleon. Ships that sailed from Manila full of goods from Southeast Asia, from Japan, from China, taken across, very hazardous, right down past California into Mexico, then the goods down to South America, into the Americas, and then to Europe. So the Spaniards began that. The Portuguese, you ask, where were the Portuguese? They just sort of sat there and took over Malacca and, well, we're here. And then, 1850, a long time later, after the Spaniards came into the Southeast Asia, Spain and Portugal, the kingdoms, merged together. So it didn't really matter who they were, but it was always referred to as Spain. Now, 1616, at last. What's the old race between the tortoise and the hare? So the tortoise was everybody else except England, and England the hare. 1660, we got here. Into the Spice Islands. Wow, we're here. Now we're going to make our money. Sorry, La, we got here before you. We're in charge. So England sort of flat-footing around the area. Where will we go? What will we do? We want to make money too. We need spices. So let's see what happened. Then come the naughty old Dutch. I say naughty because I'm married an Indonesian, and the Dutch were not nice to Indonesia. 1602, VOC, the trading company. And it's also called the East India Company, but the Dutch East India Company. They tried to get the spices, but the Portuguese and Spanish had their fingers in every pie on the Spice Islands. So what did the Dutch do? Okay, La, we're not going to go and take plants. We're going to conquer the islands of Indonesia, Nusantara, the archipelago. And so they went in as conquerors, not as merchants. They then took Malacca, 1641. So poor old Malacca's on it's had Chinese, it's had Portuguese, it's now got the Dutch. Then 1660, the Dutch and the English are having a few barneys, few arguments. And then 1685, England took Bencoolen, West Sumatra. Now, that was wonderful for the English because later they used Bencoolen to swap, and they took Malacca. And so they were setting into the Malay Peninsula. Singapore founded, 1819, Penang, 1796. And the states had their sultanates and their kingdoms. So England was moving into the Malay Peninsula, removing the influence of Thailand, which was coming into the north of Malaysia, slowly moving that out. All right, now let's get to our shopping list. China wanted spices, so did Europe. Payment by barter. They were sophisticated buyers. Now, some reports are most unpleasant. These are people without shoes, without clothes, a bit of bark. And when you come along, they'll chop your head off and eat you if they can, and they'll, throw things at you when your little ship sails into their harbour. And others were saying, well, we've had kingdoms in that region since the 5th century. We built Borobudur. Look at it. What was the old poem we used to say? Look on my, I am Ozymandias, king of kings. Look on what I've done, and you fear what I've done. So it was a strange time when we were having all of these different personalities. But what were the things? 5th century onwards, no goods of value for exchange from some of the small islands. They were still cannibals and headhunters, and indeed in West Sumatra into the 19th century they were still cannibals. Not headhunters, that was Borneo, but Sumatra. in the Batak lands, they ate the first Dutch people. They always said we'd got Dutch blood because we ate the original Dutch. It's one way to do it. And I suppose it's Red Cross has never heard of that way for blood transfusion. Steady trade, particularly 13th century. We're getting a bit more sophisticated. We're a bit more products. China wanted tribute, still getting tribute. Some were paying it to China, some to Thailand, and some had already paid as much as they had to the early kingdoms. And so you get into the habit, what do we call it when we pay tribute? It's got a small word, 5-letter word, taxes. That's what it's called in modern language, taxes. That's what it was. Now, the customers, and these are some of the descriptions. Some wore bark clothes. Now, you see some of these trendy boutiques selling you, paper dresses and plastic dresses, bark dresses. No shoes. Oh dear, no shoes. How terrible. Southeast Asia, you don't wear your shoes in the house. There's nothing wrong with not having any shoes. Some were jewels and silk clothes because they were sultans, they were from the kingdoms, they traded with other people. Some had expensive porcelain. Now, this is the key for China's great fortunes in Southeast Asia, porcelain. Some sold exotic birds in exchange for iron cooking pots. Most customers were merchants coming in from China, but sometimes the emperor would take over one of the expeditions down south. Some were killed, kidnapped, there were punishments, and in Brunei, they were the best friends of the Sultan and the whole of Brunei. Couldn't go wrong. Products, porcelain, especially blue and white, but in later years. Originally green, then if you mix with iron, red, and then with cobalt, you can get the blue and white. Now, I lived at, central Java, and we were always seeing in the shops old articles of blue and white that came in from Surabaya on the east next to Bali, that came in from the Moluccas. They'd be dug up. You'd find these little bowls, utensils, pieces of blue and white. Hundreds of years later, from time to time, there'd be shortages of porcelain at home, and so there'd be almost, in the end, they almost had unions of potterers who were making blue and white. Best customers in the early years, Egyptians, Indians, and the Turks. They were Islamic, and the blue and white utensils were shaped in the way that the Islamic for water carrying, for food and things, finger cleaning and what have you. And the designs were suitable, and they'd sometimes have the Islamic prayers written on the design. So they changed the form of those. Then when they're going across with the Manila galleon to Mexico, they're changing the form because it's going to go into Mexico, then into Europe. So the potterers knew at different times what to do with their blue and white. Controlled by the Ming Dynasty, they took over, and they employed, the merchants employed the potterers. From about the 9th century, we had the blue and white. All right, and that was with cobalt. Also with beeswax, which is one of the products you get from Southeast Asia, was used in glazing the product. Whoops. Now, umbrellas. China would sell a lot of yellow umbrellas. Now, nothing to do with roads and sitting on a road. Yellow umbrella is a sign of aristocracy. In Malaysia, you never wear yellow if you're going to a reception where the Sultan or the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, the king, is present. You're not allowed to wear yellow. It's the sign only for under Islamic law and sultanates for the king. So yellow umbrellas for all of the kings, the princesses, the princesses, the tunkus, etc., etc., etc. Big business in yellow umbrellas. Not bad business. Mark of leadership. lacquer bowls. Now, most of these went across from Japan to China. Japan closed the doors in about the 16th century, so China was carrying those goods down from China on behalf of Japan. And then silk. Lots of little worms in China making silk. They used to make silk in one of the Spice Islands in more recent years. And I think it was in Ambon. I've got a piece of silk. It's about 6 yards long. And you can fold it up. It'll fit into a little box like this. Very beautiful. But they don't do silk anymore. I've had it for many years. Poor little thing. Textiles, wall hangings, particularly in Islamic families. Carpets of some sort coming down. So these are coming down from China to these areas of Southeast Asia. What's going up? Of course, spices. Nutmeg, cinnamon, pepper, cloves. And remember, these are medicinal, not only to make food better, medicinal. Woven cloth made from plant fibres. Have you ever seen the shirts from the Philippines? So the trade was there. This is batik. It's not the best batik, but they were making batik and putting silk and gold threads. They still do. I've got a lot of Malaysian Kelantanese batik sarong with the silk and gold thread through them in the design. Yellow wax for the things. And the pearls. Pearls mostly came from India. Exotic birds and plants. So you'd have a sweet singing bird coming up. I don't know how they survived, the poor little things in the cold weather. And then bronzes. From the 7th to the 11th century, copper and tin. And mostly the bronzes, the statues, the head thing, were made for Hindu Buddhist divinities. And they had axes since the 1st century, later used for mirrors. Human and animal figures, and the kris, the curved sword of Southeast Asia. Some gold, some silver. Camphor. Couldn't do without camphor. Shells. Exotic fruits. I often wonder what happened with my favourite food, durian. It smells like indescribable, but it's the most delicious fruit in the world. I love durian. So I don't know what happened to durian in China. Maybe they, got markets going because it's very valuable stuff. Medicinal plants. Indonesia said last year, 30,000 medicinal plants in Indonesia. Wow, you'd never need a doctor. You keep chewing until you got better. Ginger and turmeric amongst them. Jamu is Javanese medicine, very ancient and very, very much tied up with kramat. You used to see beautiful, tall Javanese ladies walking the street with a big basket on their back selling jamu medicine. You can have a drink on your way to the office, pip you up for the day or on the way home. All right, edible bird nests. I don't like those. Supposedly healthy, banned now in Australia. Tortoise shell, now banned. 1973 convention. Betel nut. Now, this one's used in Southeast Asia, particularly in India, and people's gums and what have you. Disgusting, the colour and it dribbling everywhere. It's banned now in many countries. It's not good for you. And exotic trees, the beautiful teaks of Indonesia up to China. Currency. Have we got some money? So this is 16th century bitcoins. I don't know what a bitcoin is, but sounds right. So for 5,000 years, China had silver coins, but they're only for large payments. You couldn't have bought your McDonald's with it or your cup of coffee or your bus fare or whatever. You couldn't. Not enough money. Gold had been used, large denominations, not for good daily use. And then paper money. And it said Marco Polo wrote home and said, I've seen money that's paper being used. Big news in Italy. Now not Italy, because they hadn't become Italy until 1850. What's his name? Remember him? Huh? In Italy. Who united the Italian states? Garibaldi. 1885 maybe? A bit earlier. I'll have to look it up. All right. So he said, big news. In China they got paper money. But they kept printing more and more and more, just like Monopoly. You know Monopoly money? That's what it was like. So not worth anything. From the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 906, they had copper coins for daily use, similar to the coins in Japan. No standard testing or weight. So how do you know it's worth what it says it's worth? There was no mint, there was no exchequer, anything like that. The other currency, down south, porcelain. Large pieces became used as currency, same as one nutmeg was currency, a broken piece of blue and white. Very popular down south. And Chinese copper coins were used down south. I don't know what people did with them in the 8th century, but the ones I have seen, used to go into the shops and buy them, they're all linked together to make necklaces that kill you. They're so heavy, copper coin, you put it on, it'd be, break your back. Or then they'd make them in the shape of dolls, or because they're round, and you just tie them up with string. And that's what we did with the copper coins in later years. Now, barter was goods. And then Malaysia, which had tin, made ingots of tin. And they were called shoes or saisi. And they're just large blobs of tin. Standard size and value, but the authorities kept a check on that it was pure. The shape originally were pagodas or sugar loaf, and still some Chinese coins around, and tin money spread to other parts of Southeast Asia from Malaysia. The tin mines are great and still going strong. Now, early Malays and Indonesians are animists, and so this kramat problem arose. So in a tin mine in Malaya, you had to bring along the pawang, the spirit man, to get involved in mining the tin. And then later, when tin money became animal shape, it was connected to the virtues of the animals. Elephants, my favourite, the guardian spirit of the village or the shrine. These are animists. We've not got to strong religion yet. So for, what's this year coming with Chinese year, New Year? Little pigs. So until you're Muslim, you can like little pigs. After you're Muslim, we don't have pigs. But this year of dogs, we don't like dogs very much as Muslim either, so we'd cut out a couple of those. But elephants, crocodiles, stuff like that. That's my money in the shape of a little elephant. Really nice. Made from tin. And then, 15th to 18th century, the ingots, these little pagodas of tin, are hollowed out. And round the edges, they're all put around. You put a little ridge around. This is called milling, and it means jaggering the edges so that you can't fake the coins. Muslim areas, they had symbols of religion imprinted onto the coins or likeness of the ruler, and they were state coinage. And it only took, later on, 25 Spanish dollars to buy freedom from slavery. Thought you'd be interested in that. Not too expensive. Now, the Spanish dollar. What was it? Why did we need it? Silver, not only in China and Japan, but at least from 8th century, everybody knew about silver. But the real revolution was 1497. When did Columbus sail the ocean blue? 1492. So 5 years later, the Spanish came across. Remember, they had no right to be in Southeast Asia. No right at all. But they were minting silver in Mexico and Patagonia, parts of their provinces. And they were making coins called the Spanish silver dollar. The Austrians at that time were making a thaler. Is that well? Apparently, I'm tone deaf with languages that are not flat languages. Malay and Indonesian are flat, so it's okay. But if it's got any levels of language, I'm tone deaf. They minted thaler, but they weren't as popular as the Spanish dollar, because it had all of the romance of pirates and Hollywood movies and all of that stuff in Southeast Asia. Silver came from Spanish colonies, and remember, they were working with mercury, dyeing as they worked to clean the silver. Not nice. By 16th century, it was universal currency in Europe, Asia and Europe. And it came from Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean, water that finally comes up to us, but South China Sea water. It was global currency, subject to strict manufacture regulations by the Spaniards as to purity and value. Dollars were minted in Mexico and milled. The edges were all jagged. The tin hat money, however, was Malaysian money, hollowing out the silver and called tin hat. And it was minor currency alongside the Spanish silver dollar. One buffalo, Spanish silver dollar. Buffalo calf, we'll have a tin hat coin. Will do for that. Different values. Locally, it was referred to as the ringgit, which is the Malaysian currency now. And 1571, Spain got rid of the Portuguese and all of the influence of the Portuguese, took over Manila, and then sailed eastward, if you're looking upwards, eastward to the Americas with these journeys, fleets of goods. It was the currency of Asia. And in China, from late 16th century, I never understood this one. Everybody had to pay their tax in Spanish dollars. So if you were a farmer, you'd have to buy Spanish dollars to pay your tax. So who was the wealthy man in the village? We know who that was. It wasn't the farmer. And it was standard currency, as a standard of currency in Hong Kong, 1935. Could be assayed for purity, could be measured and tested. Copper coins could only be tested for purity after you'd melted them. And they lost a lot of their value, just a blob of what have you. The Bolivian mines were under Spanish control, and they had the largest source of silver in the world. Unhealthy. Most silver dollars ended up in China, because most of the goods on the Manila galleon were Chinese. I will see where they came from. Now, the other source of silver was Japan, but because they'd closed their doors, nobody except Japanese could get it. So it meant China was subject to external factors of value, not very good. You don't want foreigners dealing with the value of your currency. Ours is pegged to which dollar? US dollar, right? So we've done that for a long, long time. But in China, you're pegged to the currency fluctuations all around the world with the Spanish dollar, not always the best. Mid-1600s, fall of the Ming Dynasty, accession of the Qing Dynasty, and there was a second silver boom, and Chinese population increased because new crops of food coming in from America, bought with the porcelain, etc., exchanged for crops and silver dollars, and the prices spiked. The Spanish king put his face on the coins in the 18th century. Who's on our coins? Any face of anybody on our coins? You don't know, you don't deal in coins, you only deal in paper money. Well, have a look and see if we've got faces on them. Have we got nice animals or things? No, we don't go that far. Everybody else has got animals and things on their coins. We don't. More regulations accepted worldwide. So, what was sent from Manila to Mexico? Now, Manila was then full of Chinese merchants, setting up Chinese doctors, Chinese this, Chinese that, trading throughout the Spice Islands, through the other islands of Southeast Asia, collecting warehouses full of goods that were getting on the galleons, going across to Mexico and coming back with lots and lots of silver. Sounds easy, but remember, not every ship got through. There weren't many pirates, but not were all good sailors. There was a lot of nepotism. One fleet that went, the nephew of the governor of Manila was in charge. He'd not sailed because he'd been born in Manila, apparently, so he'd never been on a big ship. Didn't know where north and south and west and east were. He was in charge of about 6 ships, and he was put there because his wicked uncle had stolen money from the treasury and was selling goods, which was illegal for the Spaniards to sell their own goods on these programs. And so the nephew went along to make sure nobody stole from uncle. But he's such an idiot that he didn't know where he was sailing, and he went plank into an island and killed everybody. So bad luck, uncle, you didn't get your money back there. But there are a lot of these voyages. It wasn't as if people had brains enough to pick the best people to sail the ship. So this what went: blue and white porcelain, medicines, fabrics, embroidered cloth coming down from China in the warehouse, getting on the ship, furniture, the big ship or small tables, needles. Now, originally needles were made from tortoise shell, and now they're being made with metal. Amber and wheat from Japan. Mirrors and lacquerware, this starting with the pottery. Jewellery, saltpeter, coming from north for gunpowder. Shoot 'em up, no need to throw spears. Fine crockery for wealthy people. Spices, more spices, medicinal plants. Benzoin, which is a substance used in medicine and in perfume. You don't kill the whale, you use benzoin. Jewellery, pearls coming across from India. Where were the rubies coming from? Burma, Sri Lanka, and parts of Thailand. More products. The merchants of Manila were Chinese. The citizens of Mexico, North America, South America wanted to buy. The Spaniards were eager to get more Spanish dollars. China wanted silver dollars, and thus began the Manila Galleon. Sounds like a Hollywood movie, but it's really interesting stuff. 1565, across. Nobody except the Spaniards were allowed to do it. No one else. Nobody else had boats anyway, but the Spaniards put the rule out, no boats. Dangerous for small boats, and they were smaller than a lot of the Chinese boats that were coming down through the South China Sea. The Portuguese had gone up to China, nasty. Don't deal with those Spaniards, they're all crooks. Now, the kingdoms are joined last century. Portugal wasn't interested. Where did Portugal go in Asia? Do you remember? Gambling, where did they go? Oh, Macau, now we know where they went. And where else did they go in Asia? Goa, in India. Oh, yes. Not much, very few spots. Where is Spain now in Asia? So kingdoms go to dust. Yeah, there's no Spanish province in Asia, is there? Do you know of one? No. So all of these centuries to 1815, bye-bye then, because the Mexican Revolution got rid of the Spanish. America was America, South America were various things. They still had contact there, but in Asia there was nowhere, because the Philippines eventually Took a while, became eventually independent. And so the Portuguese went up to China and said, don't deal with those Spaniards. Can't trust them. Not nice people. But of course, Spanish dollars were more important than listening to these Portuguese merchants. Alibaba trade. Do you know what an Alibaba is? Not of 1,000 thieves. Do you know Alibaba? Terribly common in Southeast Asia. In Malaysia, there's a Bumiputra policy. If you have, it's gone in the last couple of years. If you have a company, you must have at least, in the old days, 50 shares must be owned by, 50% must be owned by a Malay. So you'd get a Malay with prince or a general or something. Oh, he's the top man. And you'd pay him to pretend that he had 50% of the sharing. So it was to be the face at the front of the thing. So in Indonesia, we had the same concept for the Bumiputra concept. And so the Alibaba, so this governor in Manila, who was not allowed to sell, oh no, this is owned by one of the Chinese merchants, and he'd slip a bit of tea money to the Chinese merchant to pop his name on the box. Never heard of Alibabas? Ah, you've missed a lot in life. Really interesting. All right. Then, all of the goods had to be paid in Spanish silver dollars. Tightly regulated sailings, because if we keep going, what happens to the price of goods? It goes down. So if there's only one blue and white piece of porcelain a year, everybody with millions will try and get it. But if you send 1 million pieces, forget it. It's not worth it. So tightly regulated by the Spaniards. Chinese ships were most of them were 400 feet by 100. I can't believe that. It must be wrong. I'm no good with mathematics. I learnt the piano for years, and I did all the conservatoire exams, but I can't add up beyond 1 and 1. The 2, not even, what do they call it? Binary stuff is beyond me. So it sounds like a big ship to me. But the Manila galleons were those tiny little ones you used to see. The Indonesians have a training ship called the Dewaruchi, and it's a sailing vessel. And you could put at least 10 Dewaruchis in this room. That's how small they are. So they were tiny little ships going up towards Japan through the typhoon, then going down towards Mexico. Fingers crossed you'd get there. Silver was the currency of commerce, and one expert said it was more advantageous to carry silver than gold, because in China and the greater part of the other markets of India and Asia, fine silver was far more valuable than fine gold. All right, so 17th century, China moved to a silver-based economy. And so Europeans wanting to deal with China had to have silver. Spanish were happy, very happy, because, we got our name on everybody's money. And our king's name's on a lot of faces on their money. So the result was the result of the Manila galleon. 1 or 2 sailings of several ships in the Manila galleon fleet, and then they only allowed 1 ship. Actually, I think they meant 1 fleet per year. To and from, no more. So anyone that wasn't in that official fleet, their stuff was illegal, couldn't be sold, and you could take it from them. The other source was Japan, but it wasn't doing much at the time. So politically, Spain had some setbacks, which resulted in defeats and withdrawal from a major role in European affairs, but that didn't stop their power until 1815. When the Manila galleon, the last one in the world, sailed to Mexico, sailed home to Mexico, and into history, as they say. That's it, I think.